Welcome to this talk, The Joy of Activism, Finding the Flowers in the Shit, which will be presented by colleagues Emma Geen and Meyrick in a moment. My name's Gail Lambourne. I manage the Bristow Institute at the University of Bristol. My colleague Sophie's here, also from the Cabot Institute for the Environment at the university, and we co-funded the programme called From the Personal to the Planetary, which culminated in recruiting 10 community fellows, 2 of which are here today, who carried out a number of activities over a year. So today, there's more details about the Personal to the Planetary programme in the zine that you have in front of you. For those online, we will send you the online link to the zine after the event, probably tomorrow. What else was I going to say? I'm not going to say too much. We really want to keep to time today so that everybody can leave at 7:30. Just a few points of practical bits and pieces. We are recording this, so there are a few things there to be aware of. For those of you in the audience, if you want to ask a question at the Q&A, we have a roving mic. If you don't want to be recorded, just tell us the question and we'll repeat it via the microphone so it's recorded. For those online, if you can ask the questions via the Q&A, and you have a choice there, you should be able to choose whether your question is anonymous or not. One other point for people in the room, the toilets are either outside of this door, turn left and follow the signs. The accessible toilet is down on the ground floor, so go back down where you came from. If you hear a fire alarm, there is no fire alarm planned, so please make your way back out the way you came, and there will be people guiding you. I think that was it. So I think now I'm just going to hand over to Polly and Emma. Thank you.
Hello. Thanks for coming along, and hello to, I don't know where to wave, maybe the camera's up there, to the people online. So yeah, it's really great to have this chance to be here. I feel like the questions of how to find joy in activism and how to make activism personally sustainable are quite ongoing questions in my mind, and I feel like there's things that I've ended up having a lot of conversations about with people, so it's really nice to have a space to reflect on those things. And before I started, I kind of wanted to just sort of acknowledge the fact that a lot of this talk is kind of about how activism can look very different for different people, and there are many different forms of activism, and the questions of joy in activism can be quite complicated and sometimes quite difficult and sometimes not very possible. So I'm definitely not saying I've found any solutions even for myself, but I'm just kind of very much sharing my story and my journey with this so far. So yeah, so a bit about me. I'm Polly, I'm an artist, and I'm interested in the kind of local and human stories behind these kind of large and nuanced and quite often pretty overwhelming topics and systems related to climate change. I'm interested in art that's kind of research-led and centred in community, and using art as journalism and art as community engagement. And I've been really lucky to be on this amazing fellowship for the last year, so the Personal to the Planetary, which has been really amazing. So my sort of connection with art was quite solidified when I developed a chronic illness at age 11. And it was kind of a way of regulating my nervous system and slowing down and observing the world and connecting with the world. And I had quite a lot of sort of nervous system impacts of my illness. I was physically disabled from about age 11 until like just before the pandemic. And I always found, yeah, this kind of impacts on my nervous system made it very difficult for me to engage in a lot of forms of activism. And I was in a bit of a cycle of kind of trying to go to things, go to protests, and then really forcing myself to do it, and often at the expense of my health, and then really kind of crashing out and being in this cycle of then really not being able to do anything for ages and being like, well, I'm not doing anything at all now, and then feeling bad about that, and then feeling quite incompetent. So I was in that kind of cycle. And someone recommended me this book, How to be a Craftivist, and it really made me think that actually maybe activism can look like a lot of different things, and maybe there are slower forms, and maybe there are forms that are more sustainable for myself and kind of play to my strengths rather than me sort of forcing through. And also maybe this can actually have quite a big impact. So that was sort of a bit of a something started changing cogs in my brain there. And then I had a residency at Collider Studios down in Exeter, and I spent a lot of time doing a really deep dive into the kind of psychology of what makes us engage with these topics that just feel really huge and really like and overwhelming, and also looking into the kind of efficacy for art as a means of communication. And kind of the crux of it really that I found was that kept coming up time and time again was the importance of local and human stories, and also the importance of a range of emotions, because I think so often there's a lot of, we know the things that are terrible, we know the things that need to happen, and a lot of the kind of psychology was saying, you know, we need, those are motivating emotions, but also you need joy, and we need excitement, and we need all these other things. And so that was kind of what I was finding out in that time. And I kind of realized that actually a lot of the work that I'd been making already was kind of centered around local and human stories, and that it was kind of what I'd always been very interested in anyway. And I love this notion of reclaiming portraiture, which is something I talk about quite a bit. So, you know, portraiture's got this history of like some rich earl stood by a mantelpiece. It's like, yes, look at all the things I own. It's like a symbol of wealth and power. And I kind of been interested in, can I take this and make it like a symbol of power and community? And I kind of feel like everyone deserves a portrait. And also I like how we're quite drawn in by a wall of faces. Like, it's if we see a wall of faces, we're quite like, oh, who are these people? And you know, that's used a lot in marketing, but it's like, can it be used to share the stories of change that's happening? And also we kind of have that like cultural reverence of like, if someone's been painted or drawn in a portrait, we think, oh, they must be an important person. So it's kind of like I wanted to use that to really highlight the importance of people that are doing amazing things within communities, and to feel like, yeah, everyone deserves a portrait. I'm also really interested in this idea of humanizing data. So I feel like if you see the figure 100, especially if you're kind of reading it in small print somewhere and you're like, 100 people did this action or signed up to this thing or attended this event or something like that, then it's quite easy to feel, if you're thinking really globally, it's quite easy to think, oh, well, that's kind of not really many. That's quite like, you don't really engage with it. Whereas I feel like if you see 100 faces, it can have a very different emotional response. And I feel like, especially if you know that they're kind of local to you in some way, or it can feel a bit more like a movement that you can step into and be part of, and feel like, oh, wow, all these people are doing these things. And so I'm quite interested to see how we can kind of flip our perception of data. And I've also always been really interested in art as journalism throughout history, and how that's kind of changed, and how it used to be the case that if you needed to like relay something to someone visually, you'd have an artist to do that. And now with the rise of photography, I kind of have a bit of an argument that there's still a place for it in a way, because I feel like we're quite oversaturated with photographs now. It's quite easy to be sort of bombarded with all angles, and I do think there's something in that slowness of, if someone's really sort of decided to sit down and draw something, and you can see that someone's made an image of something, you can kind of feel that like, oh, that must be important to that person, or like, so I sort of argue there's still a place for art as journalism today. And also in my time in the fellowship, I've spent a lot of time thinking about systems and tipping points, and learning about some of the amazing work that's been done by Tim Lenton, and I've joined the community of practice that Peter Lafort is running around positive tipping points. And I feel like if people, very like layman's overview, I'm guessing a lot of people probably know about tipping points, but if not, it's kind of flipping a system from one way of being to another way of being. And the analogy that's often given is like rolling a boulder up a hill, hence this kind of graph, and you're pushing it up the hill, and it's like you feel like you're not going anywhere, you feel like no progress is being made, and kind of just like sometimes it'll fall back again, and sometimes it's this kind of whole process. But then as you get nearer the top, it's like all of those kind of positive feedback loops kind of start, and you might have a trigger, so that actually at that point, even a very small prod can send the system kind of heading into a new state of being, and it can be self-reinforcing, and the change is self-reinforcing, and it can be hard to flip back. And so that's my I've probably butchered that, but like I've been trying to think, how can I apply art projects to this aim for positive tipping points and meaning kind of societal change? And I've been thinking, you know, maybe I can use art projects to add narrative to the kind of creating some of those positive feedback loops and sort of amplifying some of the triggers and telling those stories of change. And I think the other thing I find quite inspiring about positive tipping points is that it can be on a global scale, it can be on a national scale, it can be on a local scale, and it can also be on like a personal scale. And so I've been really thinking about how can I kind of identify these positive stories to kind of tell through art. So that's kind of a lot of the thoughts on how I work and where I've got to in my practice. And I've sort of given an example of kind of how I'm applying this to an art project. So I've been had an amazing residency at Regen, which is a not-for-profit centre of energy expertise based down in Exeter. And there's kind of a lot of experts on energy transition and renewable energy. And the funny thing about energy is it's so intangible, like we're using it now, we use it all the time, but it can be quite like, we can't touch it, we can't smell it, we can't, you know, it's quite hard to engage with. And the transition can be quite technical and quite out of reach sometimes. So we're sort of like, well, how can we create a kind of project to engage people around what's happening in Devon with energy transition? And so I said that I love kind of mapping systems and humanizing data. So I sort of started with the data set of Community Energy England. And I started kind of looking at, okay, so what's the community energy things that are happening in Devon? And who are the people and who are the organizations? And sort of trying to reach from this kind of data of like what to who, and trying to find the kind of tangible, real people and stories that are kind of behind what's happening. And so I created this exhibition. So obviously it would have been nice to, I could have included hundreds and hundreds of people and done this project forever. But within the time frame, we found these 8 people. So created the portraits are painted in ink that I made from alder cones from this guy here is a farmer. So they were from his land, so sort of relating the materials to the land. And then we made this short film, which is kind of more about the lives of the people in the portraits. And we sort of selected people to try and show that people can be involved in energy transition in quite different ways. And some of these people didn't even realise they were involved, which was quite interesting. Like, for example, we've got the farmer who's got solar panels on his land. We've got Rhiannon here, who retrained as a plumber and now specialises in installing heat pumps and retrofitting. Faithful Chanda is the National Grid's first community energy engineer. And also Kate is like, she works as a manager at a community centre, and they have solar panels on their roof from Exeter Community Energy, which helps them with their bills. But also she talks a lot about how, like, the role of community centres in helping people that are experiencing fuel poverty, and yeah, the importance of community around that. So it was amazing to get to know these people, and the project's been touring around Devon, so kind of moving around the sites that it's relevant to, and mostly in community centres. And we've been running some events as well where people can talk to energy experts, and it's been really interesting. A lot of people have been saying, God, I had no idea that any of this stuff existed, and I didn't realise that community energy was even a thing. And interestingly as well, it's also been moving around the slightly more corporate energy world, which I find quite interesting. So these people that are doing work quite on the ground and within their communities are kind of coming face to face with these kind of more like energy bigwigs. which has been, yeah, quite an interesting thing to sort of see. So yeah, coming up next, I've been delving a lot more into food systems because that's a huge passion of mine, because I've done quite a bit of farm work, and delving more into the kind of ink making and paint making and that kind of thing from materials related to the land. And so I'm hoping to do something around food systems next. And also, this is very unscientific and a bit corny, but I thought, the theme was joy and activism. I thought I'd share some really personal mantras that kind of keep me sane. And one is that I think it's attributed to Martin Luther King, but then when I tried to look it up, they were like, oh, he didn't really say it. So I have no idea who actually said this, but even if I knew the world would end tomorrow, I'd still plant my apple tree today. And for me, that's kind of in my head, keeping sane by obviously all these things that we're striving for often have a huge importance, and often for our own lives or for the lives of other people. But for me, that's kind of about trying to distance my own personal sense of whether I've failed or succeeded from whether or not the outcome appears to be happening. And especially thinking about pushing that huge boulder up the hill, you're like, well, maybe I'm just doing something along the way and not saying, oh, well, I've failed because that thing isn't happening. And another thing that really keeps me going, so I know this bit's really corny, but it's that kind of noticing things that are simultaneously true. So that's kind of where the flowers and the shit thing came from. It's like, it's not positivity in terms of like, well, there's shit, but look, a guinea pig wore a hat. It's kind of like being like, there's shit, but there's flowers in it. And both those things are true without kind of making myself focus on one or the other too much. And another example for me of that is I always think about that, like I have infinite influence and I also have infinite lack of influence. And for me, that kind of relates to systems thinking where, actually, because we're all in complex systems, we might change the course of someone's life just because we stop to like tie our shoelaces. So I feel like we all have an insane amount of power in that sense, and we all know about the butterfly effect. And so I really think about that sometimes. Sometimes you're influencing other people's lives in ways that you actually have no idea is happening. So in some ways we have this huge power. And then at the same time, I always think about, I find it very comforting to also remind myself that I cannot change a whole system, and that to think of myself as like in a shoal, and I'm one of this huge shoal. And as long as I'm kind of swimming vaguely in the right direction that I want to go in, sometimes that means getting dragged back by the current, sometimes that means just not moving at all, drifting along. Yeah, I just find it also very comforting to remember my smallness. So I know that's a lot more of a personal thing, but just that's my 2 cents in terms of joy and activism. So yeah, I hope this has all made sense. Flowers in the shit. That's kind of my story. And I'll now hand you over to the amazing Emma Geen.
That was some really brilliant stuff. And I think you might find the story iterates a little bit because we have very similar experiences, I think, actually. And when you look at it, actually, a lot of activists have this kind of story, even if it doesn't go as extreme as becoming kind of chronic illness as Polly and I have experienced. But yes, so I'm Emma Geen. I'm a freelance disability climate justice activist. And I should say I'm very much wearing that hat today. But a lot of my work I do through the Climate and Disability Programme with the Bristol Climate and Nature Partnership, and being an advisor on the Sensing Climate Research Project down at Exeter with the wonderful Sarah Bell. So all of this work is about advocating for disabled people in climate conversations. So this is really important because we're one of the groups that's most impacted by climate change. There's all sorts of stats I could throw at you for this, but I always tend to go to the one where 2 to 4 times more likely to be injured or die in disasters. And of course, as climate change worsens, we'll have more disasters. We'll also experience barriers coming from climate action that we think about our needs. So we call that eco-ableism. The classic example of that is the plastic straw bans. So when the plastic straws were originally invented as assistive technology, before people were sticking them in their Pepsi and throwing them around and stuff. So though it didn't actually reduce plastic waste that much, it created this whole new barrier for a community that really had a lot of barriers already to be facing. But lastly, of course, I should say with all of this, it's important not just to talk about disabled people as a vulnerable community in face of climate change, but also the movement really loses when it excludes us, because we're also experts and we have so much knowledge and wisdom to bring. So I always talk about how we're experts in adaptation. So to be disabled is essentially to live in a society that isn't made for your needs, that's unfriendly to you. And then you become like an expert at learning to adapt around that. You like find cunning ways to do things because the kind of usual way isn't made for you. And I think in a similar way, climate change means we're all coming into a world which is increasingly unfit for our needs, increasingly unfriendly to us, and we're all going to have to adapt as a society to learn how to live and thrive in this changing world. And disabled people, we are the experts at that. So this is why we need to be in the conversation. Yes, so my story, I was born disabled. I was born without left hand. I'm also a little bit dyslexic. But I'd say the barriers I faced tend to be more like perception, social ones. So kind of like I have, whenever I go shopping, I tend to have a bit of a fight with the cashier about allowing me to pack my own shopping. So it's like it's not a huge thing, but it's like it can be frustrating how people see me sometimes. But anyway, it meant that I was able to take part in climate activism in much the same most like non-disabled people would. I did an awful lot of high intensity civil disobedience climate activism at the start. And that was kind of pretty much, I'd say there was a period where it was kind of almost like a full-time job, which I wasn't really being paid for. I was kind of lucky that I had like accommodation at that time to let me get away with that. But then 1st of January 2022, which I always feel is sort of a bit of a sort of ominously that first day of the year, like this was going to be my life from there. I tested positive with COVID, and then very quickly after that developed long COVID. Like the first year I sort of did okay, but then I had like this really extreme period of stress at work due to terminal illness from my boss, and everything went a bit difficult. And then after that I had to step back and couldn't work for half a year at all. And I'm still like say managing just about 2 or 3 days a week. So it's an ongoing thing. And of course, when kind of faced with long COVID, with fatigue, sometimes with brain fog, like I can't go out and chain myself under a bus like I might have done in the past. But the climate change is still here. I still care about it. What can I do now? I think, I mean, in terms of I think there's an awful lot of wisdom out there that's like not within the NHS advice. If you kind of have long COVID, the way NHS would do, if you have fatigue like me, you'll probably be shunted to the ME clinic eventually. And then the ME clinic will tell you, rest, keep your life small. Even if you're feeling good, don't go out and do the things like stay at home, stay safe, save up your energy, you don't have so much of it. But I didn't really want to do that. Like instinctively, I wanted to be out there having fun. I wanted to be in joyful, playful spaces. And this was also about the time when I discovered improv. And like this was kind of really like a lifeline for me, like just being playful and silly. And like I had all these like stressful emotions with my personal life and work, and I could just go into these spaces and it's like, you can just be like a talking dog, or you can be fighting over who gets the moon or whatever. Like it was just like a space where all of my emotions go out. And so I kind of knew that this is what I wanted to be doing. I was lucky that Sparks, I don't know if people know Sparks, it's this wonderful kind of sustainable, they call it the sustainable department school, but basically like a space for discussing climate and having like sustainable crafts within Broadmead in Bristol, where they've kind of turned the old Marks and Spencers into this kind of community centre essentially. And they gave me some space for free to do a kind of creative climate residency. So I ran a series of workshops kind of exploring this question of how can we use creativity and play to support climate action. And you see down the left there, then on the right there, that's people being silly and exploring improv with and kind of to talk about climate change, as I was kind of wanting to kind of bring those worlds together. But I think even though I knew this was working for me, of course, the NH advice was telling me not to do these things. And as kind of work and activism stress kept on kind of triggering relapses, eventually I kind of like shrunk my life smaller and smaller and smaller and stopped doing the joy things, because that's, you know, the only clinic was basically, you've had it for 3 years now, that's it, you know, this is going to be your life. But then I was lucky enough to, a friend pointed me to a therapy called the Mind Body Reconnect. And that's where I really discovered what sort of Polly was talking about at the start, that my fatigue is very much about nervous system deregulation. It's about sort of getting disconnected from my own emotions in my body, or like not acting on my, not doing what I need. And very much the joy and play are answers to these things. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but there isn't really any better thing to regulate your nervous system than being joyful, than being in these spaces and exploring things. And I think it's very much also, I think it's very easy as activists to get into this place where we're burnt out or ill or all of these things, because we've got to this point where we're valuing things over ourselves, we're valuing the work over ourselves, we're valuing other people over ourselves. And I think that's very much, for anyone who's experienced disability, I think that probably is like a common feeling of like, it's been quite hard for my life to kind of go into a room and know that I will be automatically valued. The simple matter of fact is that actually, as a woman and as a disabled person, often you really do have to fight to be valued. And I think I would get into this point where it's like, I have to work super hard, because then people might see that I have a contribution, that I can be productive, that I'm worth kind of listening to. But actually, funny enough, joy does that too. Like if I go into a space and be joyful, somehow people are pulled to me in the same way if I go into a space and burn myself out. So I think joy not only like regulates the nervous system, but it's kind of regulating what we value. Joy is saying we value ourselves. So I really think joy isn't frivolous at all. It's the way to make activism sustainable and healthy for both ourselves and for everyone. So anyway, yes, I started this fellowship, and of course, started having conversations with Polly. We kind of found the similarities between our stories. Polly introduced me to this craftivism book, which she's already talked about. And, you know, just thinking about how craftivism is a form of activism that can be more accessible for many people. And part of that is being gentle in many ways. That's really helpful for many people's mental health. I think another thing it really brought home was that craftivism is a really great place to make people stop and think. I think often now people, like in Bristol, we have like a march every other Tuesday, right? If you see a march going through Bristol, often you're not stopping to think about it. You might go, oh, what's this one on? And then you go on and, you know, get your coffee and like get on with your day. Whereas I think craftivism, it's like unexpected. And when something unexpected happens, the brain has to stop and go, oh, I need to process this to work out what it means. And then that means you're sort of thinking about the issue more than you might with your kind of average march. And yeah, and of course, crafts are brilliant for nervous system regulation as well. And there are lots of really great examples of craftivism, activism with disabled people. Like, this isn't me inventing something new. But anyway, in this book, there was a campaign called the Don't Blow It campaign, where people like would embroider like handkerchiefs with a letter, and then they give them to like a decision maker they want to influence. And so I thought, oh, let's try this out, see if it works as a tactic for disability inclusive climate activism. So that's what I was doing for my fellowship. So we created a project called the Craftivism Project, collaborating with the lovely Sophie Mellor in the corner over there. We decided to do like embroidering the handkerchiefs. I worked with 15 disabled people and people with long-term health conditions. We sent out embroidery kits and instructions, and we ran 6 online weekly Zoom sessions and lessons where Sophie would teach us how to embroider. We'd have a chat about how to do create an effective letter. And that ran through March and April. Some people did whole letters, some people did a phrase, and we've had a lovely little WhatsApp group going ever since. So, but yes, in terms of obviously when you have a craftivism project, you have to have something that you're actually trying to change. So I talked to the lovely Dr. Sarah Bell, who runs the Sensing Climate project I talked about earlier, and said, what do you think is the issue that we need to take action on climate and disability? And she said like 100% emergency preparedness. So as I talked about earlier, disabled people are more likely to be injured and killed in disasters, but actually there's not very much planning being done around this, like not locally, not nationally. I've got a lot of stats on here. I maybe not read them all out because you might want a bit of time, but yes, there's an awful lot out there to show that, like, you know, so only 20% of disabled people say they'd be capable of evacuating immediately in the event of sudden disaster. And also we got to think about the slow disasters and all this as well, like in terms of this year's heat waves. I know an awful lot of people who have said they've already like started fainting in their houses or had their like conditions worsened. So like we have to be preparing for that kind of disaster as well. So we selected some like local targets and some national targets and like assigned people to embroider a letter for. These are some of the hankies. So at the front here, we've got Shelley's beautiful blue one with the killer whale. I think Shelley might be online with us. And at that right in the back there with the pink flower, that's Sarah Bell's lovely handkerchief. And we've got more online that you can look at. They are really beautiful works of art. So do look at that when you get home. So some learnings from the project. It's not all been perfect. I mean, I think certainly one of the difficulties, of course, is that though embroidery can be more accessible for some people in terms of more accessible than going on a march, it's not accessible for other people in terms of some people don't have the dexterity, and actually embroidering a whole letter on a handkerchief, that takes a really long time. And so I think it's also, you know, got to be honest and say it wasn't accessible for everyone. And then I think this is where it comes up against this kind of, sometimes it's complicated running a project as a disabled person around accessibility, because you've got to think about your own access needs as well. I started this project on the fellowship at a time when I'd had to move back home with my dad because I wasn't really able to look after myself in Bristol. So I had to kind of keep, if I was in perfect health, I would have like done this differently, offered a range of class, but that wasn't where I was. Also, sadly, didn't have enough funds to pay. That's normally like a kind of key principle I would like put in any of my kind of disability, climate justice projects. I had a chat with a couple of friends I knew I was going to invite onto the project, and they said they felt it was okay to join as an activist project, but still not ideal. I think maybe you needed a bit more scaffolding than I expected. It's actually quite a big thing to kind of sort of get people understanding the complexities of these things and writing a letter. So definitely, I think that took a bit more time into those meetings than the kind of, I wanted to have quite a lot of space to chat socially and things, which didn't quite happen. And of course, climate disaster is just too much to think about for some people, even if you're doing it through a creative, joyful method. You know, some people kind of had some difficult things going on in their personal lives and just needed to step back. And I don't know if that's a difficulty, I guess, like, I think it's kind of very welcome. I'm really glad that people stepped back when it was too much for them, but it's obviously kind of, you not wanting to put more burdens on other people. And of course, with the ironic thing as well, when I say we're talking about the heat waves this summer, because they were so bad and so many people were struggling this summer, lots of people struggled to do the craft and then, you know, to advocate on it. And also because often the campaign it was based on was actually so the expectation that people could go and meet these people in person and put them into their hands. But with quite a lot of these kind of handkerchiefs, we had to like post them, and then it kind of goes into the dark and you don't really know if it's kind of had that impact or not. But I'd say there were lots of successes from it as well. Like it was a lot more accessible for some people. And lots of people also said it's just like relaxing or fun. A few people said they would like take it to like talks or a conference or university and just do it as their listening, and that actually kind of helped them do both things at the same time. I think it was a really nice way to kind of connect and build a little community. So that WhatsApp chat I talked about was initially started just to kind of remind people that this project was still there and they could come back to it. But it's sort of become a nice little community where someone has like, oh, I've had this problem about accessibility, or this is part of my lived experience. What do other people think? Do you have ideas? Do you have things you can support with? So I think that's been a really nice space that's come from it. And also I think it is just an effective tactic, craftivism. I'd say I put mine on my LinkedIn. I don't think I've ever had so many people come up to me and say like, oh, I saw that and that was really powerful. Just because I think when you see how much time and effort someone's put into embroidering that letter, it just shows like, oh, this person really cares about these things. This is not like a boilerplate email sent to an MP. And when I did put it into my MP's hand, it was very successful, and she made all these offers of how she was going to help me. But then the cabinet reshuffle happened 2 weeks later, and she was no longer in the climate position, which is just a classic. But anyway, yes, that's me. I think we're going to go on to a little bit of a Q&A now.
I think what we're going to do is just stop the presentation. Oh, we've done that already, so we can see if there's any questions. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, the slides were stuck. We will make sure that you get the recording tomorrow. Yeah, we can send that. Yeah. Okay, no, we can send slides separately as well, if that's okay. But I just want to say a huge thank you as well to Emma and Polly for that. It was just really inspiring and thoughtful, so thank you. Are there any questions in the room?
The microphone. Anybody have any questions? Thank you. Just to say it's been recorded, so if you don't want your voice recorded, don't speak into the microphone, but I'll repeat your question, or if you're fine with your voice being recorded, speak into the microphone.
That's curious if it would be nice to know what kinds of responses you have from the people you communicate to, and if some of this seems like it has the potential to be relationship building. I think I'm just curious.
Go first, I don't mind. So responses from people that we've worked with or communicated to, and that kind of, was that the question?
Like maybe the people you're advocating to, like the decision makers.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, that's maybe more of a question for Emma. Like mine has been a lot more like around the community and that kind of work. But I would say that in that situation, I think I've been really surprised by, because I talk about like sharing these kind of local stories and the stuff that's going on. I've been really surprised by how much those kind of positive action stories don't get shared. And I think that's something that has really struck me, is like sort of doing, like I'm even in these spaces and I didn't really know community energy was a thing before I did this whole project, and then it turns out there's loads happening across Devon, and I think that's something that's really stood out for me, is like, you know, doing these projects, working with people, bringing these projects to community centres, how many people are just like, I genuinely had no idea all this was happening, like in my town, or like, you know. And I think so that's the thing that I'd say it's a slightly different, yeah, than policymakers, and but it's kind of like, I've just been really surprised by how much these kind of stories of change that is happening aren't finding their way out and being shared. So yeah, that.
Yeah, no, I think I was saying a bit earlier, like it either tends to be silence, like they don't engage at all, or when they do engage, there's, I think people are very positive. Like I think that kind of surprise of like, oh, you're not attacking me, and maybe you have some knowledge that would be useful. I think there's something about gifting luckily I drank all my water. Gifting people that is like a little bit awkward at first. Like I remember one time I kind of handed it over and they were like, oh, very nice, and put it to one side. And then when I think it sunk in that I wasn't attacking them, they kind of like unfurled it again and like, oh wow, I thought you'd just written that, you've embroidered that, and then it went very positively. I think there's something about craftivism as well that maybe I should have said earlier about, in terms of, I think one of the ways it's different from, say, civil disobedience. And when I'm talking about the differences, I think civil disobedience definitely has like its place. This is not criticizing it, but civil disobedience often is based on this idea of trying to polarize people, like trying to force them to take positions. But I think this country is just so polarized as it is, actually, like kind of getting to that place where it's like, oh, I can have a conversation with you. Like people are quite surprised and I think pleased. But yeah, obviously responses vary.
Yeah, I was just going to add that that's something I've really noticed in my work, is that by doing a project that's by its nature a bit more multifaceted, you can kind of account for nuance in a way that I feel like I've sort of struggled with in some other spaces. And it's quite nice if we've got, for example, the portrait project, since it can be like sharing these people's stories, it sort of allows for each individual person's story. And like I remember I saw like a bumper sticker once that said I heart nuance, and I was like, I want it. I feel like, yeah, it's nice to be able to have projects that feel like there's kind of space for that nuance in those discussions, and it's not just like I'm delivering this one message. It's a bit more of like, which obviously has its place, I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's, yeah, it's nice sometimes to be able to open up a conversation.
We might have more questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so Debbie's saying, thanks both, that's amazing. Can you talk a little bit about the value of being a person as the Planetary Fellow to your work? Also, are there any positive replies to the hankies? And how do I plan to use the portraits of the fellows? Oh, how do we start on that?
Do you want to start with the portraits?
Yeah, or should I start with the first questions
Yeah.
about the value of the fellowship? I think, I mean, the value of the fellowship has been huge. Like, I've always thought it's been a kind of dream of mine because I don't have a degree. I've also been quite indecisive to get a degree. I've also felt like I'm quite interested in different disciplines, and I've always thought that my kind of dream would be to just have kind of access to university and time to research. And so the fellowship was really a dream come true in that sense of just being trusted and having the flexibility, because also a lot of the time as an artist, people are so focused on the output that it's really hard to have that space to think and to research and to talk to people. And I just feel like it's really transformed my practice and made me a lot clearer on like how I work, like what is my method, what is my kind of theory of change and theory of work, and like really delving into more of the kind of system stuff and the positive tipping points. And I feel a lot more like informed, and I think it's really amazing for artists to have that opportunity to do that, because I think there's a lot of like it can be quite hard. There's not that many opportunities, I think, for artists to collaborate with kind of scientists and to make art that's like really informed, because sometimes that part's like skipped over in the process. So I think, and then as a result, the art can be less informed, and then people pick up on that. So I think it's really amazing to just have that time to collaborate with people, to talk to people, to think, to research, to learn. And I definitely feel hugely clearer, like coming out the other end on like what I want to do next and what my practice is. Yeah, which has been amazing. So I wish it could go on forever.
Did it make community for you?
Oh yeah, it was also just amazing to be part of the community of the fellowship. Like, I feel like it's just, I remember on the first day that we all met up just feeling so intimidated, but like in a good way. I just remember we all met up and I was like, everyone is really cool. And I was just like, I'm really excited, and I feel like I've learned a lot from discussions with everyone, and it's just been really transformative. So yeah, I don't know, just do
I mean, I think you said so much
Yeah.
about what I'd say, really, and it's been really, I mean, you know, I wouldn't have come up with this project if you hadn't introduced me to all that stuff, and so much learning. I mean, I feel like it was a slightly tricky one for me, because this was kind of happened in the right trough of my chronic fatigue, really. So there was, I feel like I didn't have the chance to like go on a lot of the kind of social connecting trips that other people did. But I think definitely it was really nice to create the kind of online campaign, and then be sort of, it's like I kind of, because the fellowship is so wonderfully flexible, I was able to kind of create my own online community of activists to kind of work together on this with. Did you want to talk about the portraits?
Yeah, and actually to add to that as well, I think the format of the fellowship has been amazingly accommodating for, just struggling with kind of health stuff as well. Like the flexibility has meant that it's felt really enabling in ways that sometimes other work can just be very like output, blah, 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 and actually being able to alter kind of workflows and way of working around health and everything has just meant that I feel like I've achieved a lot more than I would have done otherwise, which is really. So yeah, what was the question about the portraits of the fellows? I'm not sure about that one. I did portraits of the fellows, which are in the zine. And yeah, I'm not quite sure what's gonna happen with those. I guess they're in the zine. People can use them if they want on the fellowship. Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about it.
There was another question.
Oh yeah.
I think I've sort of already answered that one, really. Yeah.
And
so Peter says, thank you for the wonderful talks on the framing of joy as an act of resistance. Could you both say a bit more about your first experience of this idea and good examples of how we can model joy to inspire others?
I guess a lot of that, I don't know, that Venn diagram thing could be part of that.
Yeah, so we've got like a little exercise to either do at the end or send you away with that's about kind of finding your own joy in all of this. Maybe we could answer the first part.
Yeah. So first experience of the idea of joy. I think, yeah, it's hard to sort of pinpoint an exact first sort of experience, but I think it was that kind of process of like realizing that like there were other forms of activism, and realizing that in order to make this sustainable, I really needed to like think about how I was living my life. And it sounds like a bit of a tangent, but I think for me as well, a huge amount was like when the pandemic happened, almost overnight, my like 1 day a week farm job turned into like a full-time farm job. And suddenly it was like I was living in a very different way, rather than this kind of striving for this far off goal that was huge. It was like suddenly the goal was like pack loads of veg boxes and harvest, and it was really interesting how joyful it felt to make the goals a lot more like achievable by day and tangible. And I think that was a really huge thing that shifted actually in my head, of being like, wow, this, I feel so much more like calm in that sense, where I'm not striving for this task that's like so far away. And so I think that really made me rethink, like I need to find a way of applying that to this other work and making it feel a lot more sustainable in my life. And also just the endless quest of like, if you're someone that has had a chronic illness, like you're always trying to find, you have to think a lot more, I think, about how to look after yourself and make things sustainable, which I think can be quite helpful sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think first experience of joy is resistance. I mean, I think it kind of comes in lots of different layers, I guess. I mean, I think the reason why I became such a hardcore climate activist at first was because it was a joyful space. Like so I think XR is a movement that has problems, and there's definitely things it could have done better. But that's pretty much when I first became a climate activist. I just randomly heard about it, and it turned out it was the day that they were like taking Oxford Circus in London with the pink boat, and I was just wandering around. It was just a wonderful sense of community and joy, and there was just like music and partying, and people felt like actually something could change. So I think like that's what got me into that space of really throwing myself bodily into this kind of work. But then the problem is the joy sort of drained away afterwards, really. Yeah, I mean, I certainly learned an awful lot about joyous resistance from some other communities, like kind of Black joy is such a kind of powerful concept that's kind of fed into my own notions of like disability joy as well. Should we go on to the next one?
Did notice there was just another to this one. How can
Really
modern joy
as well
inspire others?
I think there is something about, it's one of the tricky things I think by being a climate activist is like you get like social norms in a space of like certainly I find it around like rest, of like you see everybody else around you burning themselves out, and so you feel like you have to do it as well. And then I find like I remember one time like another disability activist invited me to a conference and said I was like, I'm sorry, I'd love to, but I'm too tired. And they were like, well done, that was brilliant. I was like, oh, I felt really touched, and like that kind of thing of validating each other for like doing things. And I think we should do the same with joy, like just bringing moments of joy into our like average meetings. I remember there was one moment at a recent climate conference where like this really tricky like one of the panel members handed over to a member of the audience, who then was kind of criticizing some of the other people in the room. The mood went really, really awkward. But the kind of organisers had like just by chance happened to book me in to have a playful interlude right after that. And it was about, I got people, I didn't plan for this at all. I didn't know what it was going to be like, but I'd kind of had this game where people had to, around the table, find like connections, like, oh, what, you know, this is the theme of food, find as many connections you have on that table. And like the mood just completely changed. And I think there's something about just like creating, like, you know, we don't have to go and have a party at every like climate event we do, but just creating like 10 minutes for it, you know, just 10 minutes to do something a bit silly or joyful or playful, I think can really change the mood and just show everyone around us. It's important to give ourselves space to do these things. It's not frivolous. It's not a waste of time. It's like essential. and we have to like model that with each other, and then like everyone else will feel it's safe to do that as well.
Yeah. And yeah, I completely agree. It's like seeing it as a necessity. And I think also another thing that I think about in my work is remembering that telling the joyful stories of change is important. I think so often, because obviously there is so much that needs to happen, but kind of looking more into the psychology of what makes us engage. Like if we feel like things aren't already happening, we're gonna, it kind of often leads people to less likely to act. And so I think it's so important to actually be aware, like, for example, doing this energy project, it's like, when you start diving in, you're like, wow, there's so many people doing stuff. But I think it's so easy to think, oh, people don't need to know about that. Or it's like, so I think also, yeah, sharing stories of change and sharing joyful stories of change, I just think is really important as well.
Should we do this last one, then get people thinking about joy for themselves for the last 5 minutes?
Yes.
So Sarah says, it's love to hear this, especially at a time when there's so much polarisation, anger and resignation around climate work. I wondered for both Emma and Polly, what are some of your most joyful moments through the fellowship?
Oh, that's nice. I mean, so many. I think just like, I was thinking as well about that first day when we like, it was really nice the university like took us out to this like roundhouse on a bit of land, and just getting to meet everyone and being like, wow, and just finding out, because I think again talking about this, like so much of like sense of joy in what I was just saying really is relating it to like finding out what's also happening. And I think there's really something about being in a room with people who are also just spend a lot of time really thinking about these things, and it was really like such a huge boost of like, oh yeah, there's so many people out there doing stuff and I have no idea they exist, but they're out there. And it's that thing of just like trusting that you're like part of a shoal and that it's like, yeah, gonna happen. And I think there's been a lot of moments of joy, both like with the group and the activities that we've done. Like we went out and saw the peatland restoration, which is, I'm so passionate about land work, that was amazing. But also even by myself, just those moments of joy when I'm like researching something that really interests me and just being like, isn't it amazing to have the time to do this? And so like, yeah, I think it's, yeah, again, as an artist, it's like the bit that often gets skipped around. So I think there's just been, yeah, so many different points of joy in the fellowship.
Yeah, definitely echoing that. And I think there's been some real moments of joy in the kind of like WhatsApp community kind of had a little bit in terms of just like, oh, people are feeling this sort of thing as well, or and I think also, I know it sounds silly, but like when we were preparing for this talk and we both realised we had exactly the same philosophy around joy, was kind of joyful in a sort of meta kind of way. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel like, I mean, you know, chronic fatigue, I feel like has all sorts of causes and stuff, and but like sort of when you find someone to like, oh, this is what's happening to you as well, there's something about that shared experience that is, I think, really powerful.
Yeah, definitely. And we talked as well about how like when you have a chronic illness, sometimes you get really fed up of the communication. Like I always found when I had it of being like, oh, everyone needs to know that it's terrible, everyone needs to know it's bad, which is kind of true when you have an invisible illness. But also I remember getting to the point where I was just like, I just want to hear joyful stories about people that have disabilities or people that do activism, and yeah, I just think it's so important.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because that's the other side of it. Like often just being disabled, you're not meant to be joyful. It's like you're meant to be like thankful that you can just be allowed to exist and do the same things as people. Like I remember one time somebody telling me about when I was talking to them about joy, and they were like, oh, but you know, I know this woman who like, even if they asked their carers if they could have a bath and they were told there wasn't enough time for that, and it's like you're supposed to be grateful just to have the like basics of life, but actually this is where the real powerful resistance comes in, which is actually we can be joyful. Like this is like a radical act of reclaiming just an essential part of the human condition, which is being randomly denied us. Having said that, should we go on to emphasize? So we're at the last 5 minutes, so we just wanted to leave you with a bit of guidance, well, not guidance, something to like help you think about your own joyful practice. I know I've talked to some of you who've come to my talks before have like heard me bang on about this before, but I wanted to share this concept of the climate action Venn diagram by Dr. Anya Elizabeth Johnson. So it's this, you see, so it's a bit blurry. I've got a better picture on the next slide, but it's basically 3 circles creating a Venn diagram. One of the circles asks, what are you good at? So like skills, resources, networks. The other one's what work needs doing. So like obviously activism isn't effective if you're not working on something that needs to be done. And lastly, what brings you joy? So this is based sort of a bit of an adaptation of a Japanese concept called ikigai, which also has what you pay for, but I think that doesn't have to be part of this. So I tend to find that even some of the most powerful activists out there can forget that really important joy circle. So basically this is a bit of a tool to help people to think how you might take action. You basically fill in the different circles and then look at what might join them in the middle. So we wanted to give you a bit of a chance to try that at the end now. We know that not everyone can take action. Like there's absolutely no point feeling guilt about any of this. Like we're not kind of putting this in front of you because you want you to do stuff. It's just having a bit of a think about it. And also sometimes action can be really small. Sometimes just having a conversation with people in your networks is the most powerful impact you can have. Also, we know that like probably quite a lot of people here are already doing loads, and this isn't us saying doing more. It's like actually let's take a bit of time to think about how can you bring joy into what you're doing, and if you're already doing joy, how can you bring more joy? Because you can never have enough joy. So for people online, maybe if you've got a scrap of paper, you can draw the circles for yourself, or you can just do it on head. In person, we've got some paper or hand round. But just got to have like 5 minutes, well, 3 minutes now, just have a little bit of a think about that as we wrap up. So you can go away with some thoughts of how you're going to bring a bit more joy into your own activism or life.
But thanks so much for coming along.
Yeah, thank you.
Listening, and yeah, in the room and online.
Yeah, just wanted to, while people are doing that exercise, just say just such a huge thank you again to Polly and Emma. That was just brilliant. And we were just watching the claps and the hearts that were being sent during the talk. And it's so brilliant. Thank you so much. And it's been great having you as P2P. Thank you for the opportunity.